Ready? December 9th, 2021 special meeting of the Monroe County Legislature will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alcoffer.
Here.
Mr. Alcoffer is present. Mr. Ansello.
Here.
Mr. Ansello is present. Ms. Barnhart.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart is present. Mr. Baroff.
Here.
Mr. Baroff is present. Mr. Baines.
Here.
Mr. Baines is present. Ms. Boyce.
Here.
Ms. Boyce is present. Mr. Brew.
Here.
Mr. Brew is present. President Carbone.
Here.
President Carbone is present. Mr. Colby.
Here.
Mr. Colby is present. Mr. Delahaney.
Here.
Mr. Delahaney is present. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Here.
Mrs. DeFlorio is present. Mr. Dondorfer.
Here.
Mr. Dondorfer is present. Mr. Felder.
Here.
Mr. Felder is present. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell is present. Ms. Hasman.
Here.
Ms. Hasman is present. Mr. Hebert.
Here.
Rick, I'm on a Zoom call with the cop right now. Okay? I'll call, I have to call you. We're talking about.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
Mr. Keller is present. Mr. Keophit-Lassie.
Here.
Mr. Keophit-Lassie is present. Ms. Lamar.
Here.
Ms. Lamar is present. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Mr. Mafucci.
Here.
Mr. Mafucci is present. Mr. Marinetti.
Here.
Mr. Marinetti is present. Mr. Morelli.
Here.
Mr. Morelli is present. Ms. Roman.
Here.
Ms. Roman is present. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Smith is present. Ms. Taylor.
Here.
Ms. Taylor is present. Mr. Wilcox.
Here.
Mr. Wilcox is present. Ms. Wright.
Here.
Ms. Wright is present. Mr. Udelson.
Here.
Mr. Udelson is present.
We will need to suspend the rules of the legislature for the purpose of prohibiting public in-person attendance. You have a motion before you, which is moved by legislator Brew and seconded by legislator DeFlorio. This is a non-debatable motion. All in favor, please say
Roll
aye.
call vote, please.
Okay, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroff.
No.
Mr. Baroff votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Legislator Colby, I think it might be muted.
Yes.
Oh, Legislator Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahaney.
Yes.
Mr. Delahaney votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mr. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keophit-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keophit-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson?
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone?
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. 20-9. Motion to suspend the rules passes.
Please join me in a moment of silent prayer. Please stand as Legislator Dondorfer lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Legislator Dondorfer.
I pledge allegiance to
Allegiance
the flag
to the flag
of the United States
United
of
States of
America,
America.
and to the
To the
republic
republic
for which
Republic
it
stands
stands
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice
liberty,
for all.
justice for all. Justice for all.
Thank you, Legislator Dondorfer. I've called this special meeting of the legislature pursuant to the authority vested in me as president of the Monroe County Legislature by section C29C1 of the county charter and section 545-5 of the rules of the legislature of the county of Monroe. This meeting has been closed to the public and all legislators are participating via teleconference. In keeping with the legislature's tradition of openness, the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube through the legislature's official channel. Everyone participating via video or teleconference will please mute their devices except to obtain the floor or cast a vote. If seeking to obtain the floor, please simply state your name and wait for me to call on you before proceeding with your question or statement. The clerk will read the full title of each resolution and referral to avoid any confusion as to which item is before the legislature. All votes will be held via voice vote unless a roll call is requested. Today, we will have one public hearing and consider 2 items for adoption before the full legislature, items numbers 1 and 2. We will now recess for the purpose of holding a public hearing. I vote 5. I now declare open the public hearing on enacting a local law entitled amending Monroe County Charter and Administrative Code relating to legislative redistricting and term of office of members of the county legislature.
During the public hearing, we ask that everyone on the Zoom be muted. If you wish to address the legislature on this public hearing, you will then be unmuted and asked to speak. Upon starting your comments, please state your name. You will have 2 minutes in which to address the legislature, and when the timer sounds, you will then be muted over again. Is there anyone on the Zoom that wishes to address the legislature? It looks like there's a couple names that I recognize. So I'm just going to start. I will go to Bob Thompson first, and I'm going to ask to unmute him, and then he will have the floor. So Bob Thompson.
I actually submitted a written statement. You can just read that.
Okay, I will move on from you then. I have you on my list. We'll go to Glynis Valenti.
Hello, I also submitted a written statement on behalf of the Southwest Planning Committee. So that could just be read. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I should ask, is there anyone that hasn't submitted a written statement that wants to address the legislature during the public hearing right now? Let me just make sure there's no one that's muted that. Hey. Does the phone number 5 that ends in 15 wish to speak?
Yes, I would like to.
Go ahead. Please state your name.
Judith Weinstein. And I'm a resident of the city. I urge members of the legislature to carefully listen to and read all the testimonies submitted for this hearing and to the Legislative District Revision Commission at its 4 hearings. This should be followed by a full discussion of the submitted map and whether it provides district lines that correct the problems cited at the commission hearings, whether today's testimony necessitates making adjustments to the map, and whether this map best serves the Monroe County residents. Only after a thorough analysis of the map should the legislature vote on approving district lines, which will be in effect for the next decade. It is anticipated that the legislature will vote to approve the Fusco Law Office map this evening. There is no need to vote this evening. The legislature does not have to approve new district lines until February 28th. Americans have become cynical about government and whether it and elected officials serve the people. Thus far, the county redistricting process has proved support for that cynicism. Approving the proposed lines this evening would continue the disrespect of the public that the commission and the legislature have displayed during the redistricting process. Some examples: there have been no or inadequate advance notice for meetings and hearings. The testimony submitted via email was not included in the minutes of 2 commission hearings. The commission held no public deliberations. The proposed maps have been presented as PDF documents which do not allow users to enter their address and see what district they are in, compare their current and new district lines, or get demographic data for the new districts. While we were able to provide oral testimony at this hearing, we are not on screen. This makes it impossible to show maps while speaking. Please make democracy work in Monroe County by not approving the maps tonight. Instead, provide user-friendly maps, hold multiple hearings with adequate advance notice, discuss the testimony publicly, and determine whether the proposed line should be adjusted. There is no rush. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the calls?
Is there anyone else that's currently on that wishes to address the legislators via voice? If not, I will move on to the written comments. I'll just do a once over just to make sure that no one's on.
Just go to the.
And then I'm going to move on to the written comments. Our first written comment is from Lori Staubitz. Dear leaders, given the historical pattern of minimum participation from the public at midterm elections and in local government, it is easy to see how a legislature came to the conclusion that public opinion is not necessary for decision making. However, we live in a new age which calls for more accountability to public input, as a whole new generation is taking the roots of democracy more seriously. You have received and continue to receive input on the redistricting process. There are many considerations for how we the people can be best represented here in Monroe County. I implore you to rise to the occasion to be true ambassadors for nurturing and keeping a healthy, engaged process for all your decision making. We need our leaders to rise to the occasion beyond party politics if we are to grow and flourish together. These times call for courage and thinking beyond your next election. Please take seriously public input into the redistricting process. It matters. Lori Staubitz. Our next speaker is Joanne Nania. I'm writing to tell you of my extreme displeasure regarding the redistricting process the legislature has followed thus far. The secrecy, hurried meetings, and lack of notice and transparency is insulting and dangerous to the citizenry and our democracy. I ask you to do the right thing with this effort, namely take the time to properly solicit, listen to, and then carefully consider the voter inputs on these proposed new maps. Why is the legislature so afraid to allow voters to hear and speak about this effort? The manner in which it is being conducted soundly implies that there is something to hide. Please correct that and open the process up for collaboration with all your constituents. Please include this letter as public input. Joanne Ania. Our next speaker is Julie Damerel. I'm a constituent of Justin Wilcox in District 14. I'm writing to request the legislature to evaluate public input that has been received prior to the December 9th as well as on December 9th and respond to it before making revisions to the districts. Although the District Revision Commission held hearings in October and dozens of people submitted comments, including requests for specific changes to the current boundaries, these were not discussed and the proposed maps do not illustrate any response to the requests. The new maps unnecessarily fracture communities at both neighborhood and village levels with shared concerns. The county legislature does not have to vote on this on December 9. It has 3 months to act on the proposal, which is enough time to revise the maps in response to public feedback. A new legislature will be seated on January 1, and the new maps make changes to districts that impact which elected legislator represents them. I'm in District 14, for instance, and my new district will include parts of the old districts 24 and 27. The voters in those districts chose a different legislator than the newly elected District 14 legislator, Susan Hughes Smith, to represent them. Some voters in my current district will be in Districts 3, 10, 23, and 24. The splintering of District 14 is unnecessary and unfair to the voters who elected Susan Hughes Smith. Each district should be represented by the person it elected for 2022, and the new district should be voted on by the legislature that is seated in 2022, not the current legislature. The process to this point has been secretive and chaotic. This is not how democracy in Monroe County should work. I implore the legislators to Our next submission was from Scott Forsyth. I would like to comment on the boundaries of the proposed districts, in particular District 23. I reside at 30 Audubon Street in the city, which street lies within the boundaries of the current 23rd and lies within the proposed 23rd. The current 23rd is odd shaped, but it is all within the city. My interests parallel the interests of the residents at the western end downtown and the interests of residents to the north along Whitten and Culver. For good or bad, we are city folk. The proposed 23rd chops away some city residents to the west and to the north. Added are residents from North Brighton around the park and residents from West Penfield. As a voter, I do not know what gets those residents fired up. My legislator will have to learn, diverting her attention from the issues of the city. Brighton, Penfield, and Wheelong Park and Whitten are not communities of interest. Pair the residents of West Penfield with other folks from Penfield. Ditto the residents of North Brighton. Thank you for your consideration, Scott Forsyth. Our next submission was from Margaret Sapinski. I'm writing to express my concern that the redistricting process has not included a review of public input. This process has not been transparent or has been not transparent and undemocratic. Please help me understand why public input has not been considered. Margaret Sapinski. Our next submission was Melissa Johnson. I am writing in opposition of the proposed redistricting plan for Monroe County. It unfairly carves up towns and neighborhoods and has not been given adequate attention to fairness instead of politics. It is important that you take the time to listen to the public feedback you are required to collect, rather than simply voting in a policy that may unfairly advantage one party and its agenda or the other party. Thank you, Melissa Johnson. Our next submission is Carol Thiel. I just looked at the redistricting map, which doesn't make sense to me. Henrietta is chopped into 4 districts. Legislative District 13, in which I live, would include part of the town of Pittsford. That doesn't make sense. Why would the 13th district include part of another town, while the remainder of Henrietta is chopped up and attached to other districts? Carol Thiel. Our next submission is from Lori Ruiz. After reviewing the redistricting, districts 4 and 26 seem more conducive to our Gates residents. We are a largely diverse town, which is growing. Our voters need to be represented and represented correctly. Thank you, Lori Ruiz. Our next submission was from Ann Wentraub. Are we not a democracy? Do we not have hearings and use the input from citizens to make changes needed? This is shameful. Redistricting is too important to be managed as a power play. Ann Wentraub. Our next submission is from Barbara Murphy. It is my understanding that the legislature plans to vote on the proposed Monroe County maps immediately following the public meeting on Thursday, December 9th. That seems unconscionable, especially when people can't even attend in person. I ask that the legislators slow down so they can reflect on citizens' comments and so that reporters and representatives can get the facts out to constituents. There is no need to impede the democratic process by rushing. Barbara Murphy. Our next submission is Judith Sternberg. As a resident of Monroe County, City of Rochester, and a citizen interested in the decennial redistricting at both the state and local levels, I have been following the Monroe County Legislature redistricting process. What I've witnessed is a redistricting commission led by County Legislature President Joe Carbone, which does not give reasonable notice of meetings to either its commission members or to the public, has not shown any regard for the pre-map drawing input of county residents and or the concerns they raised with the existing districts. Mr. Carbone has withheld information from the Democratic members of the commission and hired Republicans serving lawyers and their selected cartographer who drew up maps that addressed none of the concerns brought up by the public. Since those maps were made public on November 30th and December 9th was set as the date for both the single public hearing and the legislative vote on the maps, there has been no effort by the commission or the legislature to publicize the hearing and no meaningful amount of time for residents to address these maps. To make matters worse, the scheduling of the legislative vote immediately following the public hearing allows no time for meaningful consideration of the public's input or time to make any district adjustments. Adjustments to any district would have ripple effects on others and cannot be done in a matter of minutes. I respectfully request that the legislative vote on the proposed maps scheduled for tonight be postponed. An additional period of time should be allotted for a second public hearing, which should be prominently publicized on the legislature website and through press releases. Following the second public hearing, the full commission and the legislative caucuses should have time to consider the public input. Judith Sternberg. Our next submission is Mary White. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this matter. As a representative democracy, I feel there is no matter more essential to building trust in our system than the districts we create to represent the people. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan organization, has described this redistricting process as chaotic, hidden from public view, and potentially subject to legal challenge. From looking at the proposed maps, I believe there is much work to be done. This cannot be the final map. It does not do well to ensure representation for all in our county. We have a powerful opportunity to build trust and accountability in our community through this process. Monroe County has the chance to be the model of fairness and transparency, to serve as a goal for other communities to follow. In order to ensure democracy prevails, we must demonstrate that we all value the principle of democracy, particularly the notion of representative democracy, over allegiance to any party. Mary White. Our next submission was from Deborah Rice Gordon. My comments pertain to the current and proposed legislative district maps for the town of Pittsford. At present, the town is divided into 3 LDs, 10, 13, and 5, which include portions of neighboring towns. This partitioning divides a community of common interests, concerns, tax base, and school system, and combines it with communities that have separate systems and needs. Rather than eliminating or reducing this partitioning, the proposed LD map maintains a portion of East Rochester in LD 10. In addition, the proposal also moves the southwest corner of the town of Pittsford to LD 5, which is largely comprised of the towns of Mendon and Rush. Therefore, rather than establishing districts based on common community needs and interests using town and or neighborhood boundaries, the proposed map further fractures our communities. These and similar concerns have been brought to the commission previously. However, there have been no responses to the public submitted comments concerning LD boundaries or other issues. Rather, it appears that a vote to approve the proposed map is planned for this week in the absence of responses to the community concerns, although the legislature has until February 28th to approve the map. Considering these factors, one is left to conclude that the redistricting process is lacking in transparency and is working in response to political pressures rather than the public need. In conclusion, I request that the commission delay voting until public requests and comments can be considered and responses made public. Deborah Rice Gordon. Our next submission is from Peter Collins. I just took a look at the proposed county legislature redistricting map. As a Henrietta resident, I can't imagine why Henrietta is being chopped up among 4 different districts, one of which actually has 2 different non-contiguous pieces of Henrietta. I thought that the strange non-compact shape of the proposed District 5, obviously designed for manipulative reasons, was extreme until I saw the shapes of District 1, 20, and 23 are equally bad or worse. Please go back to the drawing board and propose a map with compact districts that do not unnecessarily divide up towns. Thank you. Peter Collins. Our next submission is Susan Loferno. Please note for the record that we as tax-paying citizens of Monroe County state the following. 1, we want the current redistricting map that has been designed in isolation either not passed or vetoed. 2, we need to start with a blank map and remember that the county legislative map doesn't have to look like the one we have now. It can and must be compact, sensitive to local communities, and ignorant to the partisan lean of districts. Susan Loferno. Our next submission is from John Culhane. I'm writing to express my support of the redistricting map that was submitted to the county legislature. This map is a fair and unbiased representation of like communities that does not show partiality based on party, nor does it favor an incumbent or challenger in future elections. I feel that the decision to accept this map as submitted is imperative to provide government that represents all community members equitably. Thank you for your consideration, John Culhane. Our next submission is from Wendy Cross. Redistricting gives us the opportunity to strengthen community engagement and democracy itself. Like many, I have an issue with the current process as well as the proposed map. It clearly goes against the requirement of the county charter that maps produced should be compact to the extent possible, and it also removes a majority-minority district in the city. Villages and towns continue to be unnecessarily split, and the average voter who wants to engage with their local government continues to struggle to easily gain access to the system because of our gerrymandered maps. We must follow the tenets of redistricting and the county charter's requirements. One example, not only one, but an honest attempt, can be viewed on a link to a map. In this map, 9 districts are given a perfect score for compactness. No villages are divided between 2 different districts, and 6 majority-minority communities continue to exist. This is by no means a final product. But it's much closer to acceptable than the map that will be discussed on Thursday. We do not want to continue some of the historical mistakes that existed from the map produced during the 2010-2011 redistricting cycle. The current map should not pass. It should be vetoed. Then we can start with a blank map, follow the charter requirements to be compact, sensitive to local communities, and unconcerned about the partisan leaning of districts. It's not that hard to do the right thing when your motivation is the public good. Wendy Cross. Our next submission was from Harold Mundy. This email is to express my support of the new redistricting map for Monroe County. I believe this map represents a fair representation of the communities involved. It does not show partiality based on party or favor incumbent or challenger in future elections. It is imperative that the map be approved in order to support fair elections in the future. Harold Mundy. Our next submission is from Larry Foote. I agree with the proposed redistricting map that is in front of the county legislature, and I feel it is a good representation of our community and our county. Larry Foote. Next submission is from Sheila Foote. As a county resident, I agree with the proposed redistricting map that is in front of the county legislature. I feel as a county resident, it is good representation of both my community and county. Sheila Foote. Our next submission is from Elizabeth Jarabek. As a voting resident of Monroe County, I have a major concern with the 2021 redistricting process followed by the current county legislature. The redistricting process was rushed and secretive with unnecessary overuse of matters of urgency to avoid advanced disclosure of proposed legislation. Virtually all testimony at the 3 days of poorly publicized public hearings was never once discussed by the commission and is not reflected in the new maps. I strongly feel the redistricting process should not be artificially rushed. It must be transparent with full and thoughtful consideration of public input and testimony. Elizabeth Jarabek. Our next submission is Thomas Garino. I would like to express my approval for the proposed redistricting map. As I am looking at the original and then the proposed maps, I think this represents the communities in a favorable way with still being fair to all voters. Thank you for the opportunity to give my opinion. Thomas Garino. Our next submission is from Susan Mars. Please do not split up neighborhoods, specifically the South Wedge and the NBN6 area, which includes the neighborhoods in our area that have worked together on problem solving and planning for decades. Susan Mars. Our next submission is from Karen Gardner. I've been looking at the proposed districts for local redistricting, and I am not happy with the way Brighton has been fractured. I would like more information about why the new division lines have been drawn the way they have been drawn. I believe the redistricting could have been done in a better way. Please take time to evaluate public input before voting on these proposed districts. Make sure the process is completely transparent. Karen Gardner. Our next submission is from John Jarabek. As a voting resident of Monroe County, I have a major concern with the 2021 redistricting process followed by the current county legislature. The redistricting process was rushed and secretive with unnecessary overuse of matters of urgency to avoid advanced disclosure of proposed legislation. Virtually all testimony at 3 days of poorly publicized public meetings was never once discussed by the commission and is not reflected in the new maps. As a fundamental part of our local democratic process, I strongly believe redistricting should not be artificially rushed. It must be transparent with full and thoughtful conversation or consideration of public input and testimony. John Jarabek. Our next submission is from Patrick Tobin. Please listen to the public comments regarding the splitting of the NB-N6 neighborhood of the South Wedge. I have viewed the commission's hearing and this cannot be a partisan issue. The focus of the redistricting was to adequately distribute the census, but also to not split neighborhoods. I live in LD 25, which is across the river to the west of my neighborhood, which resides in LD 24. My NBN is NBN 6, which is also in LD 24. We are all very concerned. Patrick Tobin. Next speaker is Reverend Judy Lee Hay. We appreciate the effort it takes to draw the new district lines and the effort already put in. However, we urge no vote on this important issue until more time has been given to neighborhood input. We are attaching our letter regarding the implications for our NBN6 neighborhoods, particularly the South Wedge. We strongly urge a no vote at this time. And then the letter is from Lisa Reagan and Judy Lee Hay. This letter represents joint comments regarding redistricting by the Reverend Judy Lee Hay, Lisa Reagan to the Monroe County Legislature asking for the proposed map, which splits city neighborhoods into different districts, not to be voted on until the proposed maps have been revised in light of public input like that of neighborhood associations and with more public opportunity for comments. These comments follow remarks submitted to the Redistricting Commission, which we are distressed were not only ignored, but the cited problems were exacerbated by the proposed redistricting. Neighbors Building Neighbors Sector 6, NBN 6, has been an active civic group in the southeast section of Rochester since 1993. There are 6 member neighborhoods in NBN 6. They are Upper Mount Hope, Lilac, Highland Park, Swilberg, Azalea, and South Wedge. The NBN 6 group meets monthly to discuss issues affecting the neighborhoods, and we work together to address those issues. NBN 6 works collaboratively as a single entity recognized by all levels of local government. NBN 6 is a tightly knit group in a decades-long collaborative partnership. Since 1993, this historic sector group has organized itself, created community vision statements, identified key neighborhood issues, priorities, and developed action plans to realize their goals. The ultimate goal is to establish and maintain stable, healthy, and diverse neighborhoods which are developed and sustained by citizens. The focus of this community visioning process has been to capitalize on the strengths and assets which residents and organizations contribute to their respective communities. 5 of our neighborhoods Our next submission is from John Perry Smith. I hereby object to your proposed redistricting, which rips the South Wedge apart and prevents us from speaking with a unified voice on issues that are of importance to our neighborhood. John Perry Smith. Our next submission was from Jane Morgan. As an active South Wedge resident in the city of Rochester, member of the Community Engagement Committee of the South Wedge Planning Committee, member of Neighbors Building Neighbors Section 6, and president of the Hickory Neighbors United Through Service Neighborhood Block Club, I am submitting this letter in opposition to the Monroe County Legislature's intent to adopt a redistricting plan that will negatively affect our neighborhood for the next 10 years. Equally concerning is the process that was followed in adopting these redistricting maps. Once again, the proposed redistricting plan further divides parts of the South Wedge into 3 different legislative districts with more and more residential streets being divided from one side of the street to the other, or blocks divided in half. South Wedge neighborhood block clubs and organizations have worked very hard to bring cohesiveness, unity, and civic awareness pertaining to housing, zoning, the 2034 plan, and the development along the east side of the Genesee River. These issues are very specific to residents in the South Wedge and significantly different from those neighborhoods located on the west side of the Genesee. New York state law prohibits dividing communities of interest, which is exactly what these proposed maps support. Also, as redistricting causes neighborhoods to be moved to lower voter turnout areas, our votes and civic initiatives are diluted, thus denying residents of their constitutional right of one person, one vote. Most concerning, however, is the unconstitutional process by which the redistricting map being considered tonight were created. In August, Monroe County Executive Adam Bello proposed legislation to create an independent citizen-led commission to redraw the 29 legislative districts based on the soon-to-be revealed 2020 census. Jane Morgan. Our next submission was Karen LaBracco. I live in the village of Brockport and the town of Sweden. On October 15, along with 10 other individuals, I testified at the public hearing in Hamlin, and the clerk read about 24 additional written comments received. The most common comments addressed the need for a transparent process, no gerrymandered districts, keeping together communities of interest, and adequate time for the public to review any proposed maps. Unfortunately, few of these requests have been addressed in this proposal before you. I specifically pointed out the problem of dividing the Sweden Village subdivision between L2 and LD2 and LD20, and appreciate that flaw has been eliminated. However, the village of Brockport remains divided. And as much as Sweden shares a lot of characteristics with our neighbors to the east, the town of Ogden, and the village of Brockport and the town of Sweden are completely different from the portion of the town of Greece that they are combined with in LD20. There's no rush to pass a new map. It is not a matter of urgency. I have frequently heard leaders of this body state, if people don't like what we are doing, they should make their views known at the voting booth. People have, and you should respect the voters and postpone any vote on finalizing this map until 2022. Karen LaBracco. Our next submission is from Rebecca Collins. Please do not pass the current map presented on Thursday, December 2nd. We need district maps that are compact and avoid majority minority districts. The map should be sensitive to local communities. Thank you, Rebecca Collins. Our next submission is from John Goodwin. As a resident, I write you to provide my third communication in opposition to the current redistricting map. I state this because I not only object to the opaque process, but find that the map violates the criteria of the county charter. Please note that my input is to either not pass or veto this most current proposed map. It is obvious to all that the map has been drawn up to give the greatest voting weight to one party while diminishing the voting power of any others. Such tactics violate the principle of equality and the doctrine of one person, one vote. Let's end the highly partisan tactics and find ways to achieve better, fairer, and more objective redistricting. Thank you, John Goodwin. Our next submission is from Jennifer Goodrich Vocal. I'm writing in a show of support for and approval of the redistricting map that has been submitted to the county legislature. The map appears to be fair and representative of like communities. It does not appear to favor or disfavor incumbent legislators. Thank you for taking my comments into consideration. Jennifer Goodrich Vocal. Our next submission is from Mary Hassan Callan. I write to express my deep disappointment in the closed, secretive, and narrowly focused redistricting process, as well as the predictably unsatisfactory sole draft of the proposed map of redrawn Monroe County legislative districts. While others, including the minority members of your own commission, have enumerated the many egregious flaws in the process, my remarks focus on the problems not solved or even addressed by the new proposed map. Districts whose boundary lines cut through and divide communities of interest. It is my understanding that preserving the integrity of communities of interest is a goal of the redistricting process and is, of course, essential to effective non-gerrymandered representation. I live in the town of Sweden, one of several areas with seemingly arbitrary district lines dividing the community. Both the current map drawn in 2011 and the newly proposed map divide the 8,000 resident village of Brockport along Main Street, with the west side of the village, along with the carve out on the east side residential housing tract Sweden Village, consigned to LD2, while the east side of the village finds its community of interest associated with LD20, which includes the town of Ogden and the entire village of Sweden, or Spenceport. Are the interests of residents of the east side of the village of Brockport and the town of Sweden more closely aligned with those of the village of Spenceport and the town of Ogden, rather than their neighbors across Main Street? I invite you to consider another map, not perfect, but worthy of review in that it addresses the Brockport, Sweden issue, as well as other serious flaws. Mary Hassan Callan. Our next submission is from Mary Olinger. Please communicate the following comments to members of the redistricting committee and all members of the Monroe County Legislature. We are deeply disappointed in the manner in which the proposed redistricting of the county legislative districts has been conducted. It appears that the whole process has been conducted behind closed doors with virtually no opportunity for citizen participation and comment. It also appears that the proposed redistricting is following the Republican playbook of seeking to disenfranchise segments of the population. We urge you to postpone voting on this proposal at this time and to open the process to meaningful participation by Monroe County citizens and to present a plan which reflects the desires of the community and which communities of interest intact. Your legislative position requires you to act in the best interest of the entire community of Monroe County. Mary Olinger. Our next submission is from Megan Thompson. We have an opportunity this year to make the legislative districts better than what they currently are by making them more compact and eliminating unnecessary splits that are happening in towns and neighborhoods throughout the county. This will help constituents with engaging with their local government and reduce confusion. The map that is currently being proposed should not be passed, and instead we should be looking at bipartisan options that can help accomplish these objectives. Megan Thompson. Our next submission is from Paul Kane. My comment on the proposed maps is to remind you that there is no procedural requirement to vote on these maps immediately. You have until February to take action. I believe that you should allow sufficient time to consider comments from the public and make revisions accordingly. Paul Kane. Our next submission is from Ken Corpus. I've been speaking with my local county legislators about the redistricting, and I would like to provide my thoughts on the matter. I do like the proposed redistricting map because it appears to be based off of the existing district map with mostly minor adjustments as needed to meet the requirements. It looks like communities of interest are kept together, and also minorities in Monroe County should be well represented in the proposed districts. I am disappointed the Redistricting Commission was unable to even get a quorum to conduct its business at one scheduled meeting, but I applaud the President of the Legislature for taking actions to move this process forward. I am in favor of the new district plan. Ken Corpus. Our next submission is from Kathleen Kane. I'm writing to you as a resident of LD 16. I'm deeply concerned about the Monroe County Legislative District Plan that was drafted by the Fusco Law Office. I'm equally concerned about the process that brought this plan up for a vote tonight. As others have noted, this process is happening faster than required by the county charter. The minority party has been excluded. Most egregious to me as a taxpayer is that according to file number 210478, this plan was drafted at Monroe County expense, and we later learned that it was drafted with the help of co-counsel John Campoli. Mr. Campoli has been described by a local press as a, quote, veteran Republican elections lawyer, end quote. Of course, redistricting will have some competition between parties to divide the electorate into districts favorable to their own. However, the use of county funds to buy Republican expertise is unfair. Nobody will run in these districts until 2023. You do not have to vote on this plan until the end of February 2022. So I am asking the legislature to please table this motion tonight. Allow the Monroe County taxpayers to examine the plan that we paid for and provide our legislators with specific positive recommendations for improving the plan. Kathleen Kane. Our next submission is from Barbara Grosh. I urge you to not vote tonight and not pass the proposed new district maps. My concern is that the proposed lines hinder citizen engagement at the most local level. People learn about community problems from their neighbors. Neighborhood associations and villages work to build a community and solve problems. Often solving local problems might lead to requests at the next level of the next higher level of government, in this case, the county. It is needlessly confusing to citizens to split up neighborhoods and villages to disable what could be natural knowledge networks. If half of the village of Brockport has to work with a legislator whose main constituents live in Ogden, or half of the South Wedge has to work with a legislator whose main district is on the far side of the river, it makes it harder to solve neighborhood problems and harder to be competent, engaged citizens at the county level. We are not asking for the moon here. It is thoroughly possible to draw district lines that yield equal sized districts while respecting neighborhood and village boundaries. We include below a link to a map drawn by Dylan Daler, which does so. Unlike the maps you are considering, it doesn't split any villages or cut up city neighborhoods. It doesn't cut across the city boundary. 3 different suburbs, Henrietta, Brighton, and Pittsford, are divided into fewer districts in the Daler map than in the proposed maps you are considering. The proposed maps reduce the number of majority-minority districts by 1. We question that, and a court might too. The proposed maps are full of zigzags, cutouts, peninsulas that make a person suspect gerrymandering on first visual inspection. Barbara Grouch. Our next submission is from Sarah Yaworski. Please accept the following comment for the record at tonight's public forum included in the special meeting to consider redistricting for Monroe County. My name is Sarah Yaworski, and I am a resident of Rochester, living in the 19th Ward for over 34 years, and I am deeply concerned about Monroe County's inability to achieve its potential, due in large part, I believe, to the lack of determination of its people and their elected leaders to work together to make our county as strong as the sum of its members. Rather, it suffers from the constant conflict of factions competing for power. The irony is that its power diminishes due to the conflict as effort and resources get wasted and cancel each other out. Today's vote on redistricting can be a turning point to making Monroe County strong. A demonstration of commitment to democratic principles and cooperation would send a powerful signal to our community, and beyond that, its leaders take their jobs and public service servants seriously. A redistricting plan that has failed to listen to the input of its constituents is not a plan deserving of ratification. A plan that creates districts that are not compact and encompass separate neighborhoods and towns is contrary to objective redistricting principles and not deserving of ratification. A plan that is ratified without due consideration given to the comments of us here who have taken the time to offer our needs to our elected officials is not worthy of ratification. The vote today tells everyone that this is only pretense to accept input that is obviously being ignored. Please consider this rushed, too imperfect redistricting plan and put one forward that is worthy of a great place to live. Sarah Yaworski. Our next public comment is from Donna Alexander. I respectfully request that the following comment regarding the redistricting process be read tonight. Thank you for providing the public with the opportunity today to comment on the proposed redistricting maps and the work that all of you do as elected leaders on behalf of the residents of Monroe County. I strongly believe that when people are given multiple opportunities to provide feedback to legislators and a genuine dialogue is actively encouraged, we obtain the best possible outcomes for our communities and strengthen people's faith in government. At a time when distrust of institutions and politicians is a pervasive problem that threatens our democratic way of life, it is extremely important that leaders do everything possible at all levels of government to restore the people's faith. Although initially I had only casually been following the redistricting process, I really took notice when the League of Women Voters referred to the process as chaotic, hidden from public view, and could be subject to legal challenges. When a nonpartisan organization whose mission is to empower voters and defend democracy refers to redistricting in this manner, we should all take notice. As such, I ask that the Monroe County Legislature slow down and take more time to incorporate public feedback into the final steps so people feel that the process was inclusive, transparent, and fair. Donna Alexander. The next submission is from Bradley Huber. I'm writing as an individual resident to personally express concerns that the proposed redistricting maps for LD 16 and 17 split 2 established neighborhoods almost directly in half. There are the Briarwood neighborhood. This neighborhood is east of St. Paul Boulevard, west of Cooper Road, and north of Titus Avenue and the Winona Woods neighborhood. This neighborhood is north of Titus, west of St. Paul, and south of Winona Boulevard. I think both neighborhoods should remain intact regardless of which district they are placed in. Brad Huber. Our next submission is from Patricia Cutts. I live in the town of Sweden outside the village of Brockport. The village is the center of most of my shopping and social activities. It is both logical and useful that the two entities be included in the same district. On October 15, I was at the public hearing in Hamlet, where several people spoke and the clerk read about 24 written comments received. The most common comments addressed the need for a transparent process, no gerrymandered districts, keeping together the communities of interest, and adequate time for the public to view any proposed maps. Unfortunately, few of those requests have been addressed in the proposal before you. I am relieved to see that the problem of the Sweden Village subdivision divided between LD2 and LD20 has been eliminated. However, the village of Brockport remains divided. And as such, as much as Sweden shares a lot of the characteristics with our neighbor to the east, the town of Ogden, the village of Brockport and the town of Sweden are completely different from the portion of the town of Greece that they are combined with in LD20. We will not get the best representation when our representatives have to divide their energies among 3 different communities. There is no rush to pass a new map. It is not a matter of urgency. I have frequently heard leaders of this body state if people don't like what we are doing, they should make their views known at the voting booth. People have, and you should respect the voters and postpone any vote on finalizing this map until 2022. Patricia Cutts. Our next submission is from Bob Thompson. In reviewing the proposed redistricting map, I am astounded at the lack of transparency in its creation, as well as nearly totally ignoring the public input sessions held this past October. Releasing the revised map just days before a vote and holding a public input session minutes before a vote allows no chance for meaningful public input, much less changes to be made. The proposed redistricting divides or continues to divide neighborhood associations, many traditional and ethnic neighborhoods in the city. Further, it is geographically illogical and seems to only serve the political needs of the creators. We expect better of our elected leaders. As a member of many Neighbors Building Neighbors, MNBN, and as chair of the Highland Park Neighborhood Association, I strongly urge that this redistricting proposal be set aside and redrawn with the appropriate input of community leaders and the public at large. Should the Monroe County Legislature choose to adopt the proposed map, I strongly urge the county executive to veto its adoption so that a proper process may be followed and a more equitable redistricting be completed. Bob Thompson. Our next submission is from Dylan Daler. If the county legislature sought to spend thousands of dollars on a flawed process that created a map that looks like something created in a mad scientist lab, then tonight you can rest on your laurels. But if you want to approve a good map that attempted to follow any of the tenets of redistricting, then this map should be voted down, and the contract with the lawyers who made it should be revoked. Now, the flawed process that others have criticized since the October hearings has brought you this map that is less compact and gives less of a voice to minority voters than the map that exists now. 11 of the districts are given a 0 rating according to a measurement of compactness. But you don't need statistical measurements to question why a district spans from Charlotte to Gates, what voters on Meg Street have in common with the voters who live near Penfield High School, or if the business interests of companies in the Eastman Business Park and the shops on Main Street in Brockport have anything in common. Worst of all, this map manages to dilute the minority vote share in one district enough that there are now only 5 majority and minority districts instead of the 6 that existed after the previous redistricting cycle. Before this map was released, I honestly wondered what could be done to make a future map worse than what we have now. And apparently this was the answer to my question. This cycle could have easily reunited the village of Brockport, avoided having the 7th district take on part of the city and not cut Henrietta and Brighton into 4 districts apiece. Maybe the map maker had genuine naivety. Dylan Daler. The next submission was from Teresa McFarland Porter. I'm troubled by the county legislature's opaque and secretive redistricting process. The current majority flouts democracy by denying constituents an honest public hearing. There is so much wrong about the gerrymandered proposed map. Just one example is the carving up of my community, Brighton, into 4 separate districts. Please do not approve this map. Teresa McFarland Porter. Our next submission is from Ann Casey. The Monroe County Redistricting Commission is a sham. Republicans are pushing through a district map with little to no input from Democrats and the public. There is no legitimate reason to rush this process. The public should have 3 months to consider a proposed map. Ann Casey. Our next submission is from Jeremy Scher. I write on behalf of Indivisible Rochester to provide a public comment for today's meeting. The Redistricting Commission failed to disclose its method for creating its map, the authors of the map, the number of maps it considered, and whether its map is purely the work of the Republicans on the commission. It is obvious from the commission's failure to divulge any information about its process that its map is, in fact, exclusively the product of a partisan Republican process meant to give more power to Republican voters than Democratic or third-party voters. We do not expect Republicans will honor their duty to their constituents to provide fair and nonpartisan maps, so we will not bother to ask Republicans to vote against this flawed product of a sham process. Instead, we ask County Executive Bello to veto an approval of the map, and we ask Democrats to stand together to support this veto. Jeremy Scher. Our next submission is from Dave Garrettson. Well, here we are. You tried to rush through a redistricting plan and it backfired. Nice going, Joe Carbone. It started with a series of hearings in October. Despite inadequate notice and holding the sessions at inconvenient times and lousy locations, the public showed up. I drove 26 miles myself to attend the first one at the Mendon Fire Hall. Hardly anybody showed up for that first one. By the next night, people were starting to realize that this was happening and came out. Then on the last night for the Friday evening session at Hamlin Town Hall, a capacity crowd. Their message loud and clear. Listen to us, don't draw these maps without our input. Okay, thought President Joe, it's time to lock the doors. No more letting the public show up to have their say. Back to online meetings. Even better, let's lock out the Democrats too. We'll spend Thanksgiving weekend drawing maps and spring a surprise meeting on them for Monday. Oops, the word got out anyway. About 20 public comments came in. Their theme, don't do this without our input. Show us the maps, listen to us. The Democrats on the panel also let Chairman Joe have. Commissioner Ortiz described the process, or rather the lack of process, as a sham. And here we are. You pushed through the maps. The maps are horrible. The public is outraged. You are sitting there listening to dozens of angry comments. Voters are upset, and it's all for nothing. Everybody knows that these maps are headed for the dumpster. So why bother? Dave Garrettson. Our next speaker is Bernie Labraco. I was disheartened to hear about the rush to approve new Monroe County redistricting maps. The county legislature has 3 months to act on the proposed maps and incorporate public feedback, which the District Revision Commission failed to do, especially since a new county legislature will be seated on January 1, 2022. A second issue concerns the maps of LD2 and LD20. As a resident of Brockport, I don't believe that splitting the village by drawing the division line separating LD2 and LD20 right down Main Street respects village voters. There must be a way to keep the village intact. Bernie Labraco. That is the last of the written comments.
Nice job, Mr. Clerk. There being no more comments. I
Point of order, Mr. President.
Yes.
I'm led to understand there may be a few people on the call who may want to speak but misunderstood the direction. So if we could inquire one more time in case there's somebody here who would like to speak. Does that make sense?
Yes, he'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
I think he did that once before. Did they just come on?
No, he did it, but apparently some people may have been confused. I just want to double check is all.
Is there anyone on the call currently that has not had a chance to have their comments either read or heard that wishes to address the legislature before we end the public hearing?
Guess not.
Is that fair enough, Legislator Baroff?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, I'm online.
You push through the maps. The maps are horrible.
I am online. Can I be entered into the meeting?
Voters are upset and it's all for nothing. Everybody knows that these maps are headed to the bye-bye. Would the person that has the phone number ending in 28, do you wish to address the legislature at this time?
Yes, I do.
Then can you please state your name?
Yes, I do.
I was disheartened to hear about the rush to approve new Monroe County redistricting maps. Can you please state your name?
Jane Morgan, you already began to read my entrance, but I would like to do it in person with my voice.
Go ahead. You have 2 minutes in which to address the legislature.
Yes, I do. Tell me when to begin.
Go ahead.
As an active resident of the South Ridge, President Hickory Neighbors United Through Service Law Club, I'm submitting this testament in opposition to adopt a redistricting plan that will negatively affect our neighborhood for the next 10 years. Equally concerning is the process that led to the creation of these maps. This plan further divides parts of the South Ridge into 3 different districts, with more and more residential streets being divided from one side of the street to the other. Residents in South Ridge have worked very hard to bring cohesiveness, unity, and civic awareness pertaining to housing, zoning, the 2034 plan, and the development along the east side of the Genesee River. These South Ridge issues are significantly different from those neighborhoods located on the west side of the Genesee River. New York state law prohibits dividing communities of interest, which is exactly what these proposed maps support. Also, as this redistricting plan causes neighborhoods to be moved to lower voter turnout areas, our votes are diluted, thus denying us of our constitutional rights, one person, one vote. Most concerning was the process by which these maps were created. Executive Adam Bello proposed legislation to create an independent, citizen-led commission to redraw the 29 districts. It was rejected by this legislature. Instead, President Joe Carbone formed a committee of 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. This committee as a whole has not met once to discuss the redrawing of district boundaries. Where did these maps come from? It doesn't matter, because tonight the Monroe County Legislature is being asked to vote on this redistricting plan. The lack of transparency, the total disregard for public input, and a desire to unnecessarily rush this legislation through, that is appalling to say the least. Shame on any legislator who supports this endeavor. Thank you.
if there's anybody else on the line.
Is there anybody else that wishes to address the legislature before we close the public hearing?
Okay, there being no more comments, I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you to all members of the public who joined us either today or at any of the other 3 public input sessions held by the commission to share their thoughts and priorities. We will now reconvene the December 9th, 2021 meeting of the Monroe County Legislature. We will now hold the public forum. Mr. Clerk.
There were no comments submitted for the public forum this evening.
We will now proceed with the local laws. Will the clerk read the next item on the agenda?
Item number 1, referral 21-0482, providing that local law intro number 556 of 2021 entitled amending Monroe County Charter and Administrative Code relating to legislative redistricting and term of office of members of county legislature be lifted from the table.
Move it, Mr. President.
Moved by legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator DeFlorio. This is a motion to lift from the table. All in favor, please say aye.
Roll call
Aye.
vote, please.
Aye.
Roll call vote, please.
Roll call vote.
Thank you, Legislator Baines. Mr. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder?
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer?
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello?
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Barnhart?
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth?
No.
Mr. Baroth votes no. Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce?
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby?
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty?
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio?
Yeah.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer?
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman?
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert?
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Kefit-Lassie?
Yes.
Mr. Kefit-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar?
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci?
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti?
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli?
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman?
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox?
No.
Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson?
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone?
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. 20-9, motion to lift from the table passes.
Next item, please.
Item number 2, referral 21-0482, providing that local law intro number 556 of 2021 entitled amending Monroe County Charter and Administrative Code relating to legislative district boundaries and term of members of county legislature be adopted.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator DeFlorio. This is to adopt. I'd like to state that the Fusco law offices are available for any questions pertaining to the content of the map and/or available for potential amendments. Is there any discussion?
Legislator Baroth?
Legislator Baroth.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I leaped to speak first because I wanted to first speak to the issue that's been arising in this legislature of late, that we have very brief discussions and then someone calls the question and then all conversations cut off in a way that's incredibly anti-democratic. And I would ask my colleagues not to do that this evening. And I would actually point out that in the past, when the question had been, of course not. When the question has been called in the past, even colleagues from across the aisle, when they were told, oh, someone still wanted to explain their vote, they would, withdraw the motion because they did not want to cut off what other people had to say. I'm thinking about Legislator Colby, actually. I recall him doing that on at least one occasion. It's our job to have an honest conversation. And so I just want to point out that this is something that I think is important and that we should not be calling the question prematurely just to, allow us to go home. We're supposed to be allowed to have everyone speak. So I'd ask that if the question is called, that if someone has not spoken prior to the question being called, that the president say, is there anyone who has not yet spoken who would like to speak to this motion, to the referral first, prior to the motion being called? And that's just my request to the president, who has the authority, by the way, to do that. Because he does, please don't interrupt, he does have the opportunity to interpret what is in fact germane. He does have the opportunity to interpret what is in accordance to Robert's rules or in accordance to what the legislature can do. Robert's rules is only meant to guide conversation. The president has the authority to decide as long as a majority of votes, 15, support him in his decision. So he does have the power to actually allow conversation past somebody saying, I call the question. Now, that being said, we just heard about 1 hour's worth of testimony from constituents who are interested in this new map, some in favor and some not. And I think it's pretty representative. And from my point of view, those who are concerned in the negative had things to say. They were talking about the 24th. They were talking about the 21st. They were talking about the 1st, the 20th. They had specific examples and specific concerns that we should address. However, given the fact that we have in front of us a motion to approve this map prior to, well, if we approve it tonight, we can't really make any amendments. But if any amendments are made tonight, they're either going to be quick reactions to what we saw and heard, but with little time for thoughtfulness or to consideration of how might this impact other aspects of the map. So even though the Fusco Law Organization, firm, entity is here currently, they actually have a conversation about this. It's going to be very difficult, particularly online. So I'd point out it's either going to be a hasty process, which is going to have unforeseen repercussions that are likely not to be necessarily in compliance with all the laws of the state, or worse, if we do have an amendment put forth today that's already drawn up and ready to go, then it's just a result of yet another backroom deal facilitated by the Fusco Law Organization. And that for me would be rather reprehensible if that were to occur. So I want to address some of the concerns that we've heard and from our constituents. And particularly, I want to start with a commentary from the Neighbors Building Neighborhood Organization. They had a pretty good letter, and unfortunately we ran out of time. I just want to summarize the part that wasn't read. And talking about 5 of our neighborhoods, it's NBN 6, which had many people, include the South Wedge and Highland Park and other organizations. It says 5 of our neighborhoods are in Monroe County, and the South Wedge, the largest of our neighborhoods, is split between the LD 24 and LD 25. And they're right when they say it makes it really difficult for them to work with as a group, their representatives, because some of the issues, right, they deal with are actually city issues, but quite a few of them, in fact, are county issues. And there can be a challenge unless you have someone who's willing to say, hey, you're not in my district, but I'm going to help you out anyhow. There can be a challenge for a neighborhood organization to actually get the attention of their legislature if they're in fact split out. And so they have a quote here. And I want to put this out, and if anyone's listening from the Fusco Law Organization, I'll just suggest you listen to this. On any given street, neighbors on Avenue, for instance, are split between districts where part of the street is an LD 25 and the other part of Avenue is an LD 24. And there's only 4 short residential blocks of split between 2 different districts, and they feel very disenfranchised as a result. I wanted to highlight that because there's other things in there that are critical. So part of the district includes areas that it's proposed. It's going to be including downtown, 2 expressways, the canal, heading into West Brighton, as well as non-neighborhood specific sections of Brighton. So there are neighborhoods within Brighton as well. Now those neighborhoods are split between LD 24 and LD 14. And this is kind of problematic in that you're actually splitting up other communities that should not be disconnected. And that's just one example. So another example is someone actually said that, the reforming of District 4 and 26 was actually considered good for the representation of Gage, which is a diverse neighborhood. So this isn't just a city thing. There are actually other, pieces of evidence out there that we've not yet considered that I think we ought to be having some working committee meetings with the fiscal law entity. And I'm sorry, I don't know what to call them. I'm just going to say firm for now on. If that's incorrect, if someone wanted to correct me, that's fine.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm not trying to be insulting to them. I just don't know them.
No. We understand. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think that, in fact, if that's a concern, they need to listen to these sort of things. I think that splitting up Brighton and Pittsford into 4 different LDs is something that should have been avoided. I recognize the fact that nothing's perfect, but when you make one district more split up than it used to be, or one town more split than it used to be, something's going wrong. We're going in the wrong direction. Finally, I also want to point out that if we talk about maps, and one of the statements was it didn't really vary much from, and it was said several times, it didn't really vary much from past maps, okay? And it wasn't terribly in favor or not in favor of incumbents. Okay, but, we're not bound, as, we like to state, by past precedent. I think we don't have to be bound by what the map looked like in the past. I feel we can't move it very terribly much. I think it's something that we need to think about more broadly, and that's something that we can do with public input, to be quite honest. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention those constituents who are speaking about the opaque process and about how the commission did not do its job. As I've said before, and it'd be no surprise to anybody here, I stand in firm agreement that, in fact, yes, the commission has not done its process. The commission did not, in fact, ever meet to discuss anything, and that's really a shame. I think that we missed an opportunity there to actually do good work, do it in a timely fashion, and actually have a result that everyone, if not happy with, would have been at least equally happy and unhappy at the same time. So those are some of my concerns. The process was problematic. We've got over an hour's worth of testimony from, I lost count, but over 60 residents, constituents, who had things to say, both good and bad, about what we've had. And we don't have time, if we vote on it tonight, to have any chance to put forth a thoughtful amendment. Unless, of course, someone had a prearranged amendment that they might introduce. And then that's its own problem, because then how did that happen? So thank you. I'll be quiet now.
Mr. President, may I have the floor?
Yes, Legislator Ernest Flagler Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. President. When we looked at these the maps that came out from the commission, we didn't see much input from the Black and Aging Caucus, and we're just asking for an amendment. We put forth an amendment to these maps.
Do you have a second for your amendment, Legislator?
I'll second it.
Is that Legislator Felder?
That
Yeah.
was an amendment by Legislator Flagler Mitchell, seconded by Legislator Felder.
And I already sent it over to the clerk.
We have the amendment.
Thank you. Hang on one second.
Are we going to share the screen?
Oh, there we go. Yep.
That ain't the map.
We're just showing the amendment right now, and then we will pull up the proposed amendment to the map.
While we're looking at this, Mr. President, can I ask a question? This is Colby.
Go ahead, Legislator Colby.
If this amendment is passed, then do we have to have another public hearing? And do we have to wait a time period before that, before we can vote on the whole amendment, the resolution as amended?
I believe we'll need to table the motion, the resolution as amended to adhere to the final form requirements of New York State General Municipal Law. which requires such resolution laid before this honorable body in its final form for 7 days prior to any action being taken. At the conclusion of the 7-day required window, we will call another special meeting to hold a vote on its adoption, which legislatures and the public will be informed of at least 1 week in advance.
At that time, Mr. President, do we have open forum again for public comment again?
Yeah, that's a good question, Legislature Colby. We will hold another public hearing at the next special meeting prior to the adoption. According to the municipal law, the legislative public hearing is optional. Only the county executive is required to hold by law a public hearing, but we will have a public hearing.
And for clarification through you, Mr. President, this is a local law. That's why we have to wait 7 days for the amendment to clear. It's not a resolution. Is that not correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Legislator Baines.
We just scrolled through some pages for this amendment. I don't know what that meant to anyone, but thank you. I was asking for this. Withdrawn.
Okay.
Point of information, I'm not sure what we're looking at exactly here. Is this a new version of LD 21?
I believe what you're looking at is the amended district that legislator Flagler Mitchell, that's his amended district. Is that correct, Legislator Flagler Mitchell?
Yes.
So all the census tracts that were listed. Oh, wait, so there's multiple maps, I see. But
Whenever
man.
everyone's ready, we can have discussion on the amendment. Whoever wants.
Point of information, Mr. President.
Yes, Legislator Heber.
Thank you. Through you to the creator of the amendment, can you explain what I'm right now looking at LD 26. It's kind of small, but I believe it says 96.24%. Can you tell me what that percentage represents?
I think that's a question for the law firm.
Okay. Mr. President, through you to Mr. Fusco, could you please tell us what the percentage underneath the LD number represents?
You may be muted, Mr. Fusco.
Thank you, Mr. President. My apologies, I was muted there. What you are looking at, legislator, is a map with an overlay explaining the difference between the map that was originally to be considered by this body and now the amendments that have been proposed by legislators Flagler, Mitchell, and Felder. The 96.2%, or I'm having trouble seeing that number, is just a data point that Mr. Schaefer had put on the map. What you're looking at with respect to the map are an overlay of the existing district and the changes that are made by this amendment.
Thank you, sir.
And the amendment itself presents changes to districts 21, 22, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. And those are the maps that we're looking at right now.
Legislator Baines, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, could I finish?
I think Legislator Hebert still has the floor. Legislator Baines, you'll be
Oh,
next.
sorry.
That's all right. No problem, Legislator Baines. Through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco, could you comment, do all of these, I'm assuming all of these new proposed maps stay within the 5% allowed by the new Hochul law, et cetera? They meet all the criteria that are necessary?
Yes, they do, Legislator Herbert. And Legislator, what you're referring to is that on October 27th, Governor Hochul did in fact sign into law Chapter 516 of the laws of 2021, which by its nature requires a maximum population deviation between the legislative districts of 5%. Currently in this county, there are a number of districts that as it sits see a greater deviation than that 5%. And as a matter of fact, there is even a district as it currently sits that sees a deviation in excess of 10%, which not only violates the current law, the prior law, but also violates this county's charter. What is in the amendment before the legislature is a proposal which includes maps for each of these 29 districts that stays within that 5% deviation. And also to the ends of the legislation signed into law by the governor, follows the 6 main principles in that the differentiation between the populations from the least populated district to the most populated district, like we said, does not exceed 5%. Further, that these districts are not to be drawn and are not drawn with intent or result of denying or abridging the equal opportunity of racial or language minority groups to participate in this political process. Further, what this proposal that you see in front of does is consist of contiguous territories where practicable and is in as compact a form as is practicable. Further, it does not discourage any competition, nor does it favor or disfavor incumbents or other particular candidates or parties, and also promotes the orderly or efficient administration of elections. Essentially, what you have here is you have a county whose population since the last decennial census grew by approximately 15,000 residents. Once that happens, naturally now you have districts that have smaller or bigger populations than they did at the 2010 decennial census, which puts these districts in violation of current law. Hence the proposal in front of this legislature, which makes the districts more compact than they previously were and stays within the parameters of the statewide law and also the federal principle of one person, one vote. The amendments, like I said, refer only to districts within the city of Rochester, be those districts 21 through 29 with the exclusion of District 23, and that those amendments that you see in front of you come after the public comments that we heard previously, be it today at the public forum, be it a week ago when the Legislative Revision Commission met, or be it any of the 3 public forums that are currently available and which we watched and took notes on from YouTube. So effectively, what is in front of this legislature now is an amendment that takes into account the concerns of the citizens and some of the points that were put forth and does the job of keeping within those parameters while also following the charter, municipal home rule law, and all the relevant provisions of the federal constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco. Through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco again. One thing that concerned me is a number of the public speakers or submitters indicated that there was a reduction in the number of majority minority districts. However, when I went through the numbers you provided, it looked to me like we actually went from 6 districts to 7, which is correct. Do you know?
Legislator, your point is the point that's correct. I heard those comments made during the public forum and was confused by those and don't believe that to be the case either.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Fusco. It clearly is not the case if you go through the numbers. Give me just 1 second, if you would, Mr. Baines. That's it. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Legislator Baines.
Through you, Mr. President, to Attorney Fusco. These maps tonight reflect, as you just said, input from what you heard tonight. So you were drawing them as the meeting was going on?
That is correct, legislator. We are preparing things in real time. As a matter of fact, this amendment that was just received by the legislature was prepared for this legislature just this evening.
So through you, Mr. President, to Attorney Fusco, this president legislature indicated that any legislators who wanted to access your services would go through him. So were the requests for these new lines, did they come to you through the president or did they come directly from individual legislators or others?
The revisions that came tonight followed meetings that I had with the president of the legislature, this very same legislature that retained our firm to embark upon this project. Essentially, what you had here, legislator, is right now, as this county sits, it's in violation of current state law. And so without changing the districts, you would have a number of districts that sit in excess of the parameters of the local law, i.e. that there's a greater deviation than is to be allowed under state law. At the 2020 decennial census, the population of the county of Monroe grew to 759,443. So to stay within the 5% parameter, what we determined was that the ideal district population would be 26,188. And what you see here in front of you right now are all maps with that target district population of 26,188, give or take a minimum or maximum deviation of 5% from the lowest population district to the highest population district.
Through you, Mr. President. So Attorney Fusco, you're describing the inadequacy of the prior plan, but you drew the prior plan. So you're amending your plan, isn't that correct?
I believe the amendment was offered by two legislators as an amendment to the prior plan. The prior plan falls completely within the parameters of the state law, as do the amendment. The prior plan falls completely within the parameters of the federal principle of one person, one vote, as does the amendment. The prior plan keeps intact the cores of districts and communities of interest, as does the amendment in front of you. I think to summarize broadly what this amendment presents is changes around the edges of certain neighborhoods following the input of the people who reside in these very districts.
Through you, Mr. President, I heard two things there. I heard that you followed the input of the people who reside, and then you met with two legislators. It strikes me that it seems to me you met with two legislators, and that was the product. That was the input that you took. Although you're claiming it was from the folks you heard tonight speaking and others, but isn't it in fact the two legislators that met with you that drove these changes?
Legislator, my answer to that would be that they had input just as does any other resident of this county. Not only was there a public forum earlier this evening prior to this meeting, but also one where some 25 comments were read in front of the Redistricting or Revision Commission. And in addition, that there were also 3 public hearings that were made publicly available via YouTube. it's in taking in all of that information and all of those public comments, along with the input that I've received through the president, that we see the revisions made in this amendment.
Isn't it, through you, Mr. President, isn't it in fact the case that you had all of that information from the hearings prior to the first iteration of these maps? And that now this amendment has come along after you met with two legislators?
Well, when you talk about the fact that all of this information was available prior to those meetings, no, I would disagree with that, because the Independent Revision Commission met on last Monday. At that time, only 3 of the public hearings had taken place. So no, that wouldn't account for the public hearing that took place this evening and the information that was presented there. And in listening intently to the points made during that public hearing, we heard a lot of citizens mention keeping communities of interest intact. And to that end, that's exactly what this amendment strives to do, is to further meet those desires of people who testified in front of this body here tonight. And so what was done is that these revisions were made just this evening and presented here just in the last half hour or so, following those discussions.
Through you, Mr. President, many of the comments from the community related to districts outside of the city of Rochester. I would say the preponderance of suggestions related to towns like Henrietta and Brighton and Pittsford and Penfield. And yet none of these revisions reflect any of that input for in terms of this amendment that you're presenting tonight. Isn't that correct?
The amendment does not address the districts you just referred to outside the city of Rochester. The reason for that being the proposal, the amendment that you see in front of you mirrors the language in the original proposal with respect to those districts. And it is our position that those districts are drawn fairly, compactly, contiguously, and within the parameters of the law. Those don't see any changes inside of this amendment. This amendment only pertains to the city. The reason for that being the outside of the city districts are adequately addressed and need no further revision.
Through you, Mr. President, so you didn't meet with any legislators from outside the city. Is that correct?
Well, legislator, I believe you're from outside the city and we're meeting right now.
But after you, excuse me, through you, Mr. President, after you finished your work product, we're meeting. Isn't that correct?
Well, we did hear from a number of legislators through my conversations with the president of the legislature. But did I meet with any of those legislators individually? No, I did not.
Through you, Mr. President, the work product that you've produced, would you say that it reflects the input of the members of the commission who were not Republicans? We had 2 members of the commission who, one is our esteemed Board of Elections Commissioner, and the other is our esteemed colleague, Josh Broad. Does your work product reflect any input whatsoever from Jackie Ortiz or Joshua Baroth, who were representing the Democratic Party and the community on the commission?
I listened intently to both Ms. Ortiz and
Legislator Baines, we're discussing this amendment that was proposed by Ernest Flagler Mitchell.
Yeah,
I don't believe your question pertains to that. So let's keep the discussion to the amendment on the floor right now.
I apologize. I apologize, Mr. President, if I wandered off my jurisdiction there. So Mr. Fusco, through you, Mr. President, to Attorney Fusco, I find it hard to believe that you first produce a work product and you claim that it has integrity. Now, because you meet with 2 legislators, oh, oops, now it doesn't. Here's some new work product that has more integrity. So I find this entire process to be kind of it's abrupt. We just heard from residents who said that the process was hijacked. It was politicized. It was done behind closed doors. And now tonight, and even though these images are being flashed across the screen, we're hardly able to understand the actual granular implications of these maps. They don't tell us what street people live on. We don't know who's in these streets. So you may have that information, but we who are being asked to vote tonight do not. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Legislator Roman,
Mr. President.
Legislator Roman,
I think legislator Ernest Flagler Mitchell could, it's his amendment. Let's let him speak.
Yeah, thank you. This amendment was brought forth because we don't have no representation on this commission. And so the members of the Black and Asian Caucus want to make sure that in our amendment that we had some input. We haven't had no input in this. The Democratic Caucus have not reached out to us. We have not had any input on this. They didn't even see a right to put a Black person. We have a Latino. We don't have no Black person nor Asian on the commission. So, we made sure that our voice is being heard by putting forth an amendment that will address and to ensure that we still have representation in our districts. We can't trust the processes. So we put forth this amendment to ensure that these districts are different. The maps that were presented earlier look like the same districts we had for 10 years. So when we put forth this amendment, we wanted to make sure that that changed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion on the amendment?
Legislator Roman,
Legislator, go ahead.
Legislator Roman.
Go ahead, Legislator Roman. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I heard a few voices. All right, through you, Mr. President, I have some questions in regards to the process, but I'm just going to comment on some of the what was just said by Attorney Fusco. Attorney Fusco, I have some questions to the president for you. You continue to reiterate the fact that you took a lot of the public comment in regards to changes in the map. Can you please explain why, based on what you just stated, when you look at maps similar to, or the proposed new map now, and the continued map of LD 26, why a portion of the city will continue to be left out of that map? Many of my constituents, well, they're not my constituents at all, but many of the constituents of the Charlotte community continue to say that they did not want to be divided. If you look at this map, it is one of the most gerrymandered maps in the entire county, and it continues to look like this. And to me, this is very sad. It does not allow for proper representation. And if we're going to create any cohesive map, we should really think about what we have here tonight. So can you please answer my question as to why portions of Charlotte have been chosen to continue to be divided, that many community members have sent information to you, to members of the commission, have spoken before this body, but yet it still is not included in this proposed map.
Should that go to the legislator? Should that go to the maker of the motion?
Well, either the maker, it can go to both the maker of the motion or the attorney. Actually, I would like to hear it from the attorney.
I'd like to hear it from the maker of the motion. Legislator Flagler Mitchell.
That's great.
Point of order, point of order. That's up to the person with the floor, sir.
Yeah,
Point
I'm
of order.
asking the question. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think it should go to the maker of the motion.
Point of order. It's not up to you to decide, sir. It's up to the speaker who has the floor.
You said at the beginning of the meeting, Legislator Barath.
Point of order. I have the floor at the moment.
Set aside a
point of order. I have the floor at the moment.
I'm saying you can't have it both ways.
Mr. President, could you please respond to my point of order?
What was the question again, Mr. President?
What was the point of order again?
The point of order, Mr. President, was that the legislator Roman asked a question of the attorney, and then you tried to redirect it to another legislature. And I'm suggesting that it's not within the preview of what you should be doing.
That's not what I said. I said I wanted to hear from Legislator Flagler Mitchell first, and then we were going to hear from the lawyer.
It's still up to Legislator Roman to determine who she wants to ask the question of.
So I'm
Are you going to rule in favor or against my point of order, sir?
going to rule against it.
Okay,
I'd like to
through you,
appeal that,
Mr.
please.
President. Through you, Mr. President.
You really gonna waste this time? This meeting's gonna be long enough. You gonna waste time for the most you know it's gonna fail.
I made a motion to appeal, Mr. President.
Here we go.
Roll call vote.
Was there a second?
Second, Morelli.
Yes upholds the ruling of the president,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes sustains the rule of the chair. Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroff.
No.
Mr. Baroff votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty.
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keough-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. Rule of the president is sustained 20-9.
Mr. President,
Yes, go ahead, legislator.
I called a question.
Through you, Mr. President, I have a many questions to
No,
ask.
no, we have someone
And
just.
point of order, she still had the floor, sir.
I still have-
Legislator Roman had the floor.
That's correct. That's everyone does have the floor.
Okay, legislator Roman.
Okay, through you, Mr. President, based on the feedback from the attorney, I would like to know why a portion of Charlotte has been chosen to not be represented in the 26th legislative district. Why was that Why was that made? Based on feedback.
With regard to the 26th district, the map you see in front of you is 98.2% identical to this district prior to the map you see in front of you. So pursuant to the local law adopted by this legislature in 2011 and pursuant to this proposed amendment now before this legislature, you see a district that is 98.2% the same. The reason for that is because it's integral to keep the cores of the districts intact. So what I would take from your question is that you wish further changes and further population differences to be made, perhaps even greater gerrymandering than what you have perceived in this map, whereas the facts and the data behind the map dictate that the 26th district is 98.2% the same as it was previously.
Through you, Mr. President, that's correct. I can see the map, but attorney, you mentioned over and over again that you considered the feedback of the community. I am speaking on behalf of a community that I don't, in fact, represent. Someone has to do it, right? If you're not going to do it, someone has to. They are currently not being represented because they only represent a very small fraction of the district that they are a part of. In fact, they haven't had a conversation with their legislator in years. They have been neglected and continue to be neglected. So we have heard that over and over again, that this map, the way that it was drawn, the way that it is continuing to be drawn, is not conducive to individuals who live in the city of Rochester. I'm just going to put that out there. I understand that it's the same. You're saying that it's 98% the same. Is there a list of whether it be EDs or streets that have been addresses that have been removed from any of the maps that we're currently looking at?
So what you have in front of you and have the opportunity to review and consider over the next 7 days, when you look at these maps, you'll be able to zoom in on those and look to exactly what streets it is that you're talking about. With respect to individual addresses, in real time, that would require me to most likely pull up a Google Street View and plug in that individual address and overlay it over the street view. I'd obviously be glad to answer any of those questions or do that over the course of the next 7 days, though it may be a little difficult for me to do that for you in real time. When you talk about the census blocks that are contained within the district, each one of those are laid out in the second section of the proposal that's before this legislature. So what you see there are individual tracts and census data blocks that comprise this district. A property attorney may refer to that as the meets and bounds of the district. And so over the course of the next 7 days, there's I gladly avail myself to this legislature to assist with reading these maps and assisting you, legislator, with looking at individual streets or neighborhoods and explaining any of those differences or overlays that you may have. I would also defer to our cartographer, David Schaefer of Skyline Consulting, if he has anything that he wants to say right now regarding any of the changes for the 26th district in this amendment versus the original proposal.
Yeah, there was a small change made to the, I'm just trying to see the maps now. On the western edge of Legislative District 29, there was a portion of Legislative District 29 that crossed the river, and that piece was moved into Legislative District 26 and taken out of 29. And that caused a cascade of small changes that kind of went around. So when you lose population District 29 and add it to 26, then we had to subtract population 26 and then eventually get it back to 29. So that was the extent of the small changes to those districts. So the western portion of 29 that was on the west side of the Genesee River, right where the Route 104 crosses, that portion was added to 26. And then a small portion of 28 in that little notch at the top, that blue area, a few blocks of that were added to 28 from 26 to get the population back down.
Through you, Mr. President, to the cartographer or the attorney. With that being said, is it possible, and this is not just for me to make an informed decision, but for our constituents to be able to see these maps, is it possible to be able to create or provide something a lot more clear than what is here so that individuals know the impact of these maps on them and themselves?
To your point, legislator, we would gladly, and I believe you have access to, and it'll be posted publicly, these maps, which if you look at them on a computer, you're able to zoom in and enlarge. As they sit in paper form, they're either 11 by 17 inches or 34 by 44 inches. But obviously with the advent and benefit of the computer, you're able to actually zoom in and individual citizens, when they pull those maps up, would be able to zoom in right down to the very street level. So that is possible with the maps in front of you right now. I believe just the nature of the way that they're being shared on the screen currently, they aren't magnified to the extent that they could potentially be magnified. For instance, I see the clerk right now enlarging and zooming in on certain neighborhoods. And if the clerk would enlarge and zoom in even further, I believe that you would see even further clarity down to the street level.
If we didn't provide the 34-inch maps, would have every street labeled.
So through you to the cartographer, can we make that
It's being done
available?
as we speak. It takes a while to do those larger maps.
Okay, I think that's one of the issues people cannot see. I mean, if you live off of Clifford Avenue, for example, in LD 22, I mean, you kind of just have to count 1, 2, 3 streets and kind of figure out. My mother lives somewhere around there, right? How can she know who her representative is without having actual information on that particular map? So, with that being said,
Let's say your mother's
Is
still in
there-
22. Your mother's still
sorry?
in 22.
how would I know that? I'm glad you know where my family
It's
lives.
easy to know because if you know the streets, you know she's still up. She's on what is it, Evergreen, right?
Yes, she is.
Yes, she's still in
Let's
22.
not, Legislator Felder, let's not tell the whole world where legislator.
It's all right. Through you, Mr. President. Is there demographic information for the breakdown of this particular amendment?
Yes.
Will that be shared with the legislature?
Can we get that, Attorney Fusco?
Yes, Dr. Carbone, we will have that available for the legislature so that each one of the legislators can review that over the course of the next 7 days.
We'll also share it on the legislature website too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion on the amendment?
Legislator Felder. Oh,
Legislator Felder, is
Yes.
Legislator Roman through with the floor?
I am.
Okay, Legislator Felder.
but I just wanted to say, you know, we looked at the maps and there's been some shifts in the city, particularly in the downtown area because of, I don't want to call it gentrification, but there's been a lot of high-end apartments built in the center city. And you had 25 and 22 going through those areas. And those areas are no longer reflective of the majority of the rest of those districts. So it didn't make sense to keep those areas in those districts. And the other issue you have is that I'm trying to make sure, looking at communities of interest, you know, and trying to make sure that we actually have people who have commonality in districts. So that they have the same issues in the neighborhoods, they live in the same areas, and they can talk to each other. So it's not a perfect thing. We looked at the city. You know, I was elected to represent District 22, and so Legislator Flagg Mitchell and I spoke to the other members of the Black and Asian Caucus, and we looked at the city, and said, what is it that we need? We want to make sure that we the districts that are represented by minorities and have been continue that way. One district they talked about was a majority minority district, but it's effectively a white district because it's never been represented by a minority. And so in order to be able to do things you need to do, you have to move people from somewhere in order to get your desired results. And so I think people are pretending to care about something that they don't really care about in order to try to talk about, in order to try to cast aspersions against the districts and the lines. And I think, and I was listening to some of the one of the comments that was made over and over again because it was one of those stock comments that everybody who spoke said in the public hearing. It's not something they really care about because they never cared about never cared about these districts before in the city. So I don't believe they care now, but it's just a reason, it's just a way to be able to take shots at what's being done. And so, you know, so I said, once again, legislative flag and mission, I look at how we can best make sure that the cities that have been traditionally strong and represented by Black and Latinos, and if you look at the population in these districts, you see strong Black Latino representation in those districts, to make sure that they will still always be represented by people who have commonality with them and are not being encroached on by things out of their control, like downtown development. And that's what you see.
Legislator Barnhart.
Legislator Felder, are you relinquished the floor?
Yeah, I'm relinquished the floor.
Legislator Barnhart.
Thank you so much, President Carbone. You know, I respect the things that Legislator Felder just said, particularly about representation. And I think it would be very helpful for the legislature to have the demographic data that for each of the districts as we got for the first round of maps. I think that really helps you see in totality what Legislator Felder is talking about and what the Black and Asian Caucus tried to do here. We would really like that data as soon as possible. If that could be also posted online and emailed to us. And something else really struck me, not only during the public forum, but listening to everyone talk about these amendments and their desire for these amendments. It is so important to work together to come up with a map. I really believe that. And I really believe that bipartisan map making and working together produces a good map that the community can be happy with, that legislators can be happy with, and that have a lot of legitimacy. But there are members of this legislature who have not had an opportunity to really have that input, to work with the attorneys. And President Carbone, I'm wondering, do we have the opportunity to submit amendments? Do we have the opportunity to work with the attorney on things on things that we want to see in this map?
Yes, you have the right to work with the attorney and submit amendments. Do we have it? Does any member, well, we're going to get to further amendments after we're done with this amendment, if anybody has anyone to offer.
Well, it's difficult for us to come up with amendments on the spot. We're just now seeing these. And this process has been terribly rushed, but I appreciate that. And I just think that if we work collaboratively, we can come up with a better process and a better map. And again, that demographic data is very important to really assess what is happening here. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Legislator Barroth.
Legislator Barroth.
One quick question. It's a technical question. Through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco. Did I get right?
Yes, you got it.
Oh, good. Sorry. When we first saw the original map that was, you created, that was then shown to the commission back on November 29th or so, you stated that the maps were drawn using census tract data, tracks, correct?
Correct.
Legislator Barroth, does this question pertain to legislative?
The amendment, yes, it does. Yes. And my question is, at that time, you said that the tracks were not broken up. They were like individual tracks with the building blocks for the map. Does this new map amendment, did it break up any of the census tracts or no? Or maybe you don't know?
The new map, and certainly our cartographer, David Schaefer, can correct me if I'm wrong, but the amended map that you see in front of you also keeps in total the tract and census block numbers, such that there wouldn't be one that would be divided that would be divided under this amendment that was not divided under the original proposal. So no, you're talking about communities as a whole.
Okay, so then I guess I misunderstood what you told us earlier. Then apparently earlier there were, I'll just call them split census tract data in the map. Is that correct?
I don't believe the word split census tract data came out of my mouth, unfortunately.
Well, then whatever word you want to use, you just said that not all the census tracts are whole. Is that correct? In this map, some were divided, split, whatever you want to call it. Is that correct or not correct?
Adam, census blocks were kept whole. Census tracts may be split or not split. Census tracts are made up of constituent pieces of census blocks. We didn't split any blocks. We definitely split census tracts.
Thank you. So census blocks were kept whole, but census tracts were divided in places. And I guess my only last question is it possible for the cartographer, through you, Mr. President, to provide us a list of the EDs that have been cracked, split up, whatever you want to call it, in this new amended map from the original map from 10 years
The
ago?
census provides a type of geography called vote tabulation districts,
Mhm.
which they claim, and I believe they do, very closely match election districts. So I can give you a VTD, vote tabulation district, analysis to show you which VTDs have been split.
And according to that company, they guarantee it, that they match the EDs?
It's
to the
the
president?
Census Bureau creates vote tabulation districts
Mhm.
based on the political geography of each state.
Okay.
They're not perfect, and I've found flaws, but they are, and they're not legal documents. They're just the vote statistical areas that the Census Bureau uses. But they do align, I hate to give a number, but 95% or better to the actual election districts.
Okay, well, if you could provide that to the president to the legislators, that would be appreciated. I'm just, I've already expressed my concerns earlier. I don't want to do that. I just want to make sure we had the information available to us to look at this over time. So thank you.
Mr. President, one thing as I wanted to make as an emotion, these election districts, we have some bad election districts in the city. I'm thinking one of them, let's say Flagler's Mitchell's district that goes from Carter Street, goes from Portland Avenue beyond Hudson and from Norton Street to either 104 or the hospital. And inside that election district is like one street that's its own ED. And over through the years, some bad election districts have been written that cut across neighborhoods and cut across streets and do all kinds of crazy things. And so I'm not so sure that they're trying to compare election district data, particularly in the city, in the way some of these districts have been drawn. I have a couple of them in my district. They're absolutely crazy that the way they drew them. And so I'm not so sure that's the best way to try to make a comparison of a former district. I think the census district data is probably better, the block data. But I wouldn't look at the election districts because they have been disregarded previously.
Legislator Barth again?
Go ahead, legislator.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
sir. I don't question. I mean, I just want to know what the ED boundaries are going to be in this new map. They're not here. That's why I'm asking. It's not a question of saying if they were good or bad, but when we draw these maps, we're also having to draw ED boundaries as well. We haven't done that because we have to wait on the assembly boundaries that are drawn up in the future, and it's just not addressed. And that's the only reason I asked. I'm not using it to say, hey, they have to stay the same or not. And that's why I appreciate what legislator Felder was mentioning, but it's a reality that we eventually all have to live with. So that's why I brought that up. Thank you.
Can we go to a roll call vote on the amendment? Roll call vote.
Legislator Barnhart.
Go ahead, legislator Barnhart.
I'm
You don't want
sorry.
to go to roll call vote?
Well, can I make a motion to table this amendment so that everyone can absorb? There's a lot of changes made. We don't have the demographic data. I'd like to make a motion to table this amendment.
Second,
Who was that second? I'm sorry.
Legislator Hasman.
Okay. We want a roll call.
Roll
vote?
call vote on tabling the amendment.
Okay. Mr. Brew.
No.
Mr. Brew votes no. Mr. Felder.
No.
Mr. Felder votes no. Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Lee votes no. Mr. Alcoffer.
No.
Mr. Alcoffer votes no. Mr. Ansello.
No.
Mr. Ansello votes no. Ms. Barnhart.
Yes.
Ms. Barnhart votes yes. Mr. Baroff.
Yes.
Mr. Baroff votes yes. Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Baines votes yes. Ms. Boyce.
No.
Ms. Boyce votes no. Mr. Colby.
No.
Colby votes no. Mr. Delahanty.
No.
Mr. Delahaney votes no. Mrs. DeFlorio.
No.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes no. Mr. Dondorfer.
No.
Mr. Dondorfer votes no. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
No.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes no. Ms. Hasman.
Yes.
Ms. Hasman votes yes. Mr. Hebert.
No.
Mr. Hebert votes no. Mr. Keller.
No.
Mr. Keller votes no. Mr. Keough-Lassie.
No.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes no. Ms. Lamar.
No.
Ms. Lamar votes no. Mr. Mafucci.
Yes.
Mr. Mafucci votes yes. Mr. Marinetti.
No.
Mr. Marinetti votes no. Mr. Morelli.
Yes.
Mr. Morelli votes yes. Ms. Roman.
Yes.
Ms. Roman votes yes. Ms. Smith.
No.
Ms. Smith votes no. Ms. Taylor.
No.
Ms. Taylor votes no. Mr. Wilcox.
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox votes yes. Ms. Wright.
No.
Ms. Wright votes no. Mr. Udelson.
Yes.
Mr. Udelson votes yes. President Carbone.
No.
President Carbone votes no. 9-20, motion to table the amendment fails.
Okay, now we'll go to roll call vote on Legislator Flagler Mitchell's amendment. Roll call vote.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Go ahead, call the vote.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth.
No.
Mr. Baroth votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahaney.
Yes.
Mr. Delahaney votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keough-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
no.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. 20-9, motion to amend passes.
Okay, since this amendment has been adopted, New York State General Municipal Law requires that such resolution lay in its final form before this honorable body for at least 7 days. And therefore, we must table this resolution to allow for this time window. There are no more.
Move the table, Mr. President.
I move the table it myself, Ernest. Legislative Flagler.
Move, do we have a second?
I got it.
Second by Hebert.
Yep, Legislator Hebert has a second on the motion to table.
Should we go to a roll call vote on the motion to table?
Yes, this is the motion to table the local law as amended. Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth.
Yes.
Mr. Baroth votes yes. Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Baines votes yes. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahaney.
Yes.
Mr. Delahaney votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Haslam votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keelfit-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keelfit-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
Yes.
Mr. Mafucci votes yes. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
Yes.
Mr. Morelli votes yes. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox votes yes. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
Yes.
Mr. Udelson votes yes. President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. 26-3. Motion to table the local law passes.
Okay, so the resolution as amended is now tabled before this honorable body. We will plan to reconvene in a week's time with exact date time to be shared as soon as possible. And I will turn the floor over to Legislature Brew for the purpose of adjournment.
Yes, this honorable body remains adjourned until December 14th at 6 p.m.